Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Olivia never saw it coming. For 15 years, she had been Mark Bennett's devoted wife. His rock, his partner, his silent supporter. She had sacrificed her own dreams to help build his business, handled every detail of their lives so he could thrive, and trusted him with everything she had. But all of that crumbled the day she walked into their home and found the divorce papers sitting neatly on the kitchen counter, right next to her usual morning coffee. The note beside them was short, cold, almost transactional. "It's time we go our separate ways. You'll be hearing from my lawyer." No warning, no discussion, nothing but a signed document that stripped her of everything she had worked for. The betrayal wasn't just the divorce itself. It was the way he had planned it so meticulously. Mark had spent the last 2 years transferring assets, hiding funds, and twisting the narrative in his favor. He had made sure their house was in his name alone, their joint savings, gone overnight, the business they had built together, rebranded under his name, as if she had never existed. And the worst part, he had already moved on. Olivia found out through whispers and sideways glances from people who felt sorry for her but didn't dare intervene. There was another woman, a younger, shinier version of herself, one who had likely been in the picture long before Olivia had even sensed trouble. The courtroom was a battlefield Olivia never thought she'd have to step into, yet there she stood, facing the man she had once loved as he took everything from her. Mark sat at his lawyer's table, composed and confident, while Olivia struggled to breathe through the legal jargon being thrown her way. Every argument she made, about her contributions, about the years she had dedicated to his success, was met with cold indifference. In the end, the judge sided with Mark. She left the courthouse with nothing but a small suitcase of belongings and a hollow ache in her chest. Their home, their cars, their savings. Everything had been absorbed into his perfect little empire. She had no choice but to move into a tiny apartment on the outskirts of town, working long hours at a job she never thought she'd have to take just to afford groceries. Nights were the hardest. The silence in her empty apartment stretched endlessly, mocking the life she had lost. But Olivia wasn't broken. Not yet. Months passed. Olivia fought to rebuild herself, piece by painful piece. Then one morning, as she was leaving for work, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Bennett," the voice on the other end said. She almost hung up. She wasn't a Mrs. anymore. "This is the office of Gregory Bennett's estate. We need you to attend the will reading of your former father-in-law." Gregory Bennett, the cold, domineering patriarch of the Bennett family. He had never approved of her, had never once treated her with warmth. Yet now, even after his death, he was pulling her back into their world. Why would she be called to the will reading? She had no stake in his wealth, no reason to be there. Still, curiosity gnawed at her. And so, a week later, she found herself stepping into the grand office where the fate of Gregory Bennett's fortune would be decided. She expected nothing, but what she received changed everything. The air inside the law firm's conference room was thick with tension. Olivia walked in cautiously, feeling out of place among the polished wood, expensive suits, and cold professionalism. Mark was already there, seated at the long table with an expression of forced nonchalance, though his fingers drummed impatiently against the chair's armrest. Beside him sat Lauren, the woman he had left Olivia for. The sight of her, flawless in a tailored dress, sent a sharp pang through Olivia's chest. But she refused to let them see her falter. At the head of the table, Gregory Bennett's lawyer, a man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a measured tone, cleared his throat. "Let's begin." The reading started as expected. A few small bequests were made to distant relatives, a donation to charity. Then came the real moment everyone was waiting for, the division of Gregory Bennett's massive fortune. "To my son Mark Bennett," the lawyer read. "I leave." Mark sat up straighter, his smirk barely concealed. "Nothing." The room fell into stunned silence. Mark blinked. His jaw twitched. "Excuse me," he finally said, half laughing as if this were some kind of joke. The lawyer continued, unfazed. Due to my son's lack of integrity, cruelty toward his wife, and actions that have shamed this family, I have chosen to revoke his inheritance. Instead, I leave my entire estate, including all financial assets, properties, and business shares, to Olivia Bennet. A stunned gasp rippled through the room. Olivia's heart slammed against her ribs. What? Mark shot out of his seat, knocking over his chair. That's impossible, Lauren hissed, her eyes wide with shock. But the lawyer simply handed Olivia a document, the final legally binding will of Gregory Bennet, signed and notarized. Everything that Mark had taken from her, the house, the money, the business, it was all coming back, tenfold. This is a mistake. Mark's voice shook with barely contained rage. My father would never do this. Olivia doesn't deserve a cent of that money. The lawyer merely adjusted his glasses and read aloud from another document. In the event that my son contests this will, he shall be required to provide evidence of financial independence, showing he has not siphoned funds from his wife's contributions to our family wealth. Should this investigation reveal fraud, all personal assets under his name will be frozen immediately. Mark went pale, because they both knew there was evidence. Evidence of the hidden accounts, the forged signatures, the quiet, underhanded way he had funneled money into his personal offshore fund before leaving Olivia with nothing. Lauren's eyes darted toward Mark, realization dawning. You told me we were set for life, she whispered harshly. We were, Mark snapped, but now there was a wild, desperate look in his eyes. This isn't real, this isn't happening. But it was. With a single ironclad document, the man who had taken everything from Olivia had lost it all. Olivia took a deep breath. The weight that had sat on her chest for months, the grief, the betrayal, the helplessness, lifted like a breaking storm. She slowly stood, meeting Mark's frantic gaze. You stole everything from me, she said, her voice calm, steady. Now I'm taking it back. Mark opened his mouth to argue, to plead, but Olivia turned away. For the first time in months, she was free. She walked out of the room, head held high, as Mark and Lauren crumbled behind her. And she never looked back. The moment Olivia stepped out of that law office, the air felt different. For the first time in over a year, she wasn't carrying the weight of loss, of betrayal, of injustice. She had walked in as a woman stripped of everything, and walked out as the sole owner of the Bennet empire. The media caught wind of the will's shocking twist within hours. Gregory Bennet's decision to disinherit his own son in favor of his ex-wife made headlines in business circles and gossip columns alike. News outlets painted Mark as the reckless, unworthy heir, while Olivia became the woman who had beaten the odds. By the next morning, Mark's world was crumbling. His personal bank accounts were frozen, pending an audit. The business he had stolen from Olivia, legally transferred back to her. The house he had kept her from, now locked with security codes he no longer had access to. Everything he had taken, every ounce of power, wealth, and status, was slipping through his fingers. And Olivia, she had just begun to rise. Mark's descent was swift and merciless. In the following weeks, financial investigators uncovered the full extent of his misdeeds. It turned out that he hadn't just hidden money from Olivia. He had also borrowed against company assets without board approval, gambling on risky investments that had already begun to fail. The legal team informed Olivia that she had every right to press charges for fraud. Mark knew it too. That's why, one evening, as Olivia was finishing up in her newly reclaimed office, she heard a familiar voice outside her door. Just let me talk to her, Mark was saying, his tone edged with desperation. Her assistant hesitated. Ms. Bennet doesn't. Olivia, Mark pushed past, his once proud shoulders slumped, his face a mask of frustration and panic. We need to talk. She folded her arms, leaning back against the desk that had once been his. I think we said everything that needed to be said in that conference room. You can't do this to me, he said, almost pleading. You know my father didn't mean it. He was just trying to punish me. But you and I both know this isn't fair. Fair? Olivia let out a laugh, shaking her head. Fair was me walking into court and watching you take everything I worked for. Fair was me struggling to buy groceries while you took weekend trips to Europe with your new girlfriend. Mark clenched his jaw. I made mistakes, okay? But you don't have to ruin me. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she leaned in just slightly. I didn't ruin you, Mark. You did that all on your own. There was nothing left to say. She motioned to her assistant. Show him out. And just like that, Mark Bennett, the man who had once controlled everything, was escorted from a building he no longer had any claim to. Months later, Olivia sat in her office, looking out at the city skyline as the sun set in golden hues. She had done it. She had taken back her power, her life, her dignity. The business was thriving under her leadership, stronger than it had ever been. Employees who had once feared Mark's cutthroat tactics now worked with renewed loyalty under someone who actually valued them. As for Mark, the last she had heard, he had tried to start over, but doors weren't opening for him the way they once had. His reputation was shattered, his finances dwindling, his once perfect world reduced to nothing. Karma had worked swiftly, but Olivia, she was just getting started. She smiled, picked up her coffee, and turned toward the future. This time one she controlled. And this time no one would take it from her. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.